Third and final video on the Protestant Reformation is going to be how the Reformation has continued. We saw how it began with Martin Luther, how it continued and spread out of Europe into England, and how England turned to become Protestant. And we're going to finish up to see how it's continued, how other people have taken Luther's ideas and pushed further reform in the Catholic Church, but also to create their own religious institutions uh, to suit their ideas of how Christianity should be worshipped. So we saw from quote unquote Germany and Lutheranism, we saw how the Catholic Church was reformed in England to create the Anglican Church. In Switzerland, Huldrych Zwingli is a Catholic priest in Zurich, Switzerland. And like we saw with a lot of other people, John Wycliffe, Jan Hus, Martin Luther, he's going to attack abuses of the Catholic Church. And he wants a return to more personal faith of early Christianity, where again, that whole idea of why did people convert to Christianity to begin with is to have that personal one-on-one relationship with God and Jesus. And he wants the church to return back to the early church of the third, fourth, fifth century than what it's become, this kind of monolithic institution. He believes that individual believers should have more control over the church. There shouldn't, again, just be this big giant organization. The Catholic Church says you need to have this reading on this day. It should be, people should, again, focus more on their own personal spirituality and the spirituality that each individual church wants versus others. So as he's going to be pushing for these reforms and this break from the Catholic Church, major fighting is going to break out between the Swiss Catholics and the Swiss Protestants, causing all sorts of issues. Now, in kind of related time period and other issues, in 1536, John Calvin is going to be another person pushing for religious reform. He's going to write down his reforms in the Institutes of the Christian Religion. And this book is important because this basically is going to become the summary of the Protestant religious beliefs. If we're following the timeline, Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the Castle Church door in Wittenberg in 1517. This is now 19 years later. And so the idea of what does it mean to be a Protestant? How can you differentiate yourself from a Catholic is been kind of worked on, been formulated, been thought over, and Calvin is going and writing at this point the, the definitive or something that can act as a definitive. This is what Protestantism is, and this is what Catholicism is, which is not Protestantism. So we've gotten this from a question of the day in class. So what are Calvin's basic beliefs? And again, if you haven't gotten that, you need to know this. Is one, that men and women are sinful by nature. You are born sinful as a man or woman, and so you can't. There's no way, unlike Luther, there's no way that anybody can go and earn their salvation. You can't go and save a bus of starving orphans from falling off a cliff and expect that to get you into heaven. Calvin believed that God has already chose who to get into heaven. It's a very small list. And at the beginning of time, because God can see anybody who ever has been born or everybody will be born, God has only chosen this person, this person, this person. It's very, very, very few. And this is the doctrine of predestination, that it's already been predestined who's going to be saved and who's not. So in Calvin's mind, everybody has to act perfectly because you don't want to be one of these few people who have been chosen to be saved and then by your bad actions on earth give up that spot that God has reserved for you. And again, the fun part about this is that you don't know if you have been saved or not. That's for you to find out when you die. You just better act your best while you're on earth. People who choose to follow Calvin's belief, and again, this is just two of the major ones, not all the nitty-gritty points. They create their own religion based around Calvin's teachings, which is called Calvinism. So we're starting to see our different churches being developed outside the Catholic Church. We have German Lutheranism, you have English Anglicanism, and now we have Swiss Calvinism. So there's our buddy John Calvin, and he is going to take those ideas and again kind of incorporate them into the political world as well. Now, Calvin believes the ideal government is a theocracy. You already have this in your notes dating all the way back to Egypt, and that a theocracy is a government controlled by religious leaders. So in 1541, Protestants in Geneva, Switzerland, who again have been fighting with Swiss Catholics, asked Calvin to leave France, come to Switzerland to set up his ideal government. And so this ideal government run by Calvin is ran on very strict rules. Everyone is required to attend religious classes, not just religious services, but religious classes. You're not allowed to wear bright colors. So this is where I usually go through the classroom and go pick out everybody who's in white or who's wearing angel blue and say, yeah, you're getting kicked out. And there's no playing any card games. There's no dancing. They're very strict rules. What is the punishment for this? The punishment for wearing bright clothes, imprisonment, banishment, excommunication. So very strict punishments for very strict rules to be able to go and live the way Calvin believes you need to live. If you might say, yes, John Calvin, maybe I'm still a good person. I still love Jesus, even if I want to wear bright clothes. If you preach that different doctrine, that will get you burnt at the stake. So that's how strict the city is being run on. And why this matters to us today, what's the big idea of this, is that Calvinism is going to be ingrained into and eventually work its way out of France and Switzerland into England to become part of the Puritan church in England. Those Puritans are going to bring their brand of Calvinism to the New World and the New England colonies. And this Calvinism of the Puritan is going to establish the idea of the Protestant work ethic. And what this did is it dignified all work with the religious aspect. So this is the belief that hard work, well done, is pleasing to God. So this idea that you sit down, you shut up, you put your nose down to the grindstone, and you work your tail off, which becomes an important part of not only early New England ways of life, but also kind of becomes ingrained into the core of what it means to be an American, in that we take the least amount of days off for vacation each year. You're encouraged to work through those sick days and be a big tough guy, because this is ingrained in this idea that, again, if you work hard, God will be pleased. And there is a religious aspect to this idea of being the toughest, of having that hustle lifestyle, of being on that hashtag grind life, to be able to go and find that for you. And we have that built into this Protestant work ethic, which bubbles up kind of through American psychology and consciousness since its founding. And so you're encouraged to live this life of aggressive, vigorous activism. We hold up the people who are always in this club and that club and going to this meeting and in the play and on the football team and da, 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 da. And that goes all the way back to this part and this philosophy that Calvinism brings with it. This is also ingrained and kind of thought of it. Max Weber goes and writes it in the early 20th century, early 1900s. All right, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. So again, you get cartoons like this, where again you get your Puritans working in the office and going and working hard with this, that which again is a very much a Calvinist idea from the earliest foundings of America, but again comes from the teachings of John Calvin. Calvinism is going to spread rapidly. In Switzerland, it's going to become the Swiss Reformed Church. In Holland, it'll become the Dutch Reformed Church. Again, it'll get to England and become the Puritan Church there. In Scotland, you'll have the Presbyterians create their own church. This will be done under the leadership of John Knox. And this is where you get the idea of presbyters being the leaders of the church, who are elected and are not just there because of their theological knowledge, but they're there kind of help to lead the church people in the direction that the church wants. The Presbyterians deposed the Catholic Queen Mary in Scotland in favor of her infant son James, which will become a big deal because it'll be under James who will become the King of England and Scotland, and lead to the unification of those two countries. In France, the Calvinists will become the Huguenots, and the Huguenots will be the major Protestant religion in France, fighting against the Catholics in France. And like we saw in Switzerland, there's going to be frequent conflicts between French Catholics and French Protestant Huguenots. This is going to culminate in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which you know occurs on St. Bartholomew's Day, which is August 24th, and this happened in 1572. This is where you had a prominent Catholic prince marrying a prominent, well-known Huguenot princess. And on the morning of the wedding, angry Catholics broke in to, or I think I might have get the Princess Prize up, I say Huguenot as well, broke in, slaughtered the entire bridal party, killed the bride, the bridesmaids, bride's parents, bride's friends, the groom's parents, the groom's family, the groom's men. The groom gets out of there, and he's an important guy. We'll talk about him in a couple chapters. He's going to escape. However, the Catholics then go look at their watch and say, hey, it's only 9 o'clock. And then this starts a wave of violence across France, which will result in 12,000 people being killed because they're not worshiping Jesus in the right way. Like we said, the English Calvinists becomes Puritans. They want to purify the church of any excess. The Puritans are asking questions. Why does the church need stained glass windows? Why does it need giant buildings? Why does it need solid gold candlesticks? So Puritan churches are going to be very bare bones, very simple, because that's all God needs, and anything else can be to be put towards God's vision and God's work. Another group of Calvinists are called Anabaptists, and these are Protestants who believe that people should only be baptized when they're old enough to decide to become Christian. Right? Again, Catholics believe that you have to be baptized right away. The unbaptized are going to hell. Or the Anabaptists are saying that no, this is an important spiritual decision that each individual has to make for themselves, and they should choose whether or not they want to take on this aspect of their life, this religious life. So they're going to be baptized later in life than what we see in other groups. The Anabaptists also believe in other things like the church and state should be separate. They're pacifists and that they refuse to fight in wars, and they shared a lot of their possessions. Anabaptists are going to work their way to the New World and to North America and are going to influence modern day denominations of what the Amish are, or Quakers, or even present day Baptists in the United States. So this is a painting showing the aftermath of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris. So lots of people dying, lots of people being killed just because of their worshiping Jesus in a way that other people say is quote unquote wrong. So we begin to see the Reformation begin to spread out of Wittenberg, and we can kind of see that on the map here. From the Castle Church tour in Wittenberg, it's been spreading all over the place into different places. And again, eventually we'll start in the 1620s, heading over the Atlantic to the present day United States. If we've been following along with Christianity, we know, and we've worked our way through this pretty well. We've started with Judaism. Is Judaism Jesus? And again, this is a pretty easy bet to win in college. Jesus is a practicing Jewish person of Jewish religion. So when excuse me, when Jesus is viewed as a savior, that creates a new religion called Christianity. Christianity bubbles along until you get to 1054 when you get the question of how much of a man is Jesus, how much of a God is he? Are we using icons in worship? Is the Pope the supreme ruler? We see a split in the Christian church. The Eastern Orthodox in Constantinople, the Roman Catholics in Rome. Then we have the Crusades, we have the Black Death, we've got the Great Schism, the Babylonian captivity with the Pope in Rome and the Pope in Avignon. Catholic Church comes back together. But then we start getting printing press being invented and Martin Luther, where we have Roman Catholics, which come all the way to Jolly Catholic today. But then we get to the Protestants, where we saw German Lutherans, Swiss Calvinists, French Huguenots, English Anglicans, all coming off of these ideas of Martin Luther, starting the response of indulgences, corruptions, and his 95 Theses. So this is how we've gotten all of our different Protestant denominations and sects of Christianity. So what then is the Catholic Church doing as they're seeing this? So the Catholic Church is not turning a blind eye to all these calls for reform and that there's issues within the church. And so the actions that the Catholic Church takes in response to the Reformation is called the Catholic Reformation. And this is a movement within the Catholic Church to reform itself. This describes any actions taken to reform and renew the church once they kind of see that people are leaving it in droves to these other new denominations. The Catholic Church says, well, what can we do to address the concerns that some people have? So one person who does this is Ignatius of Loyola, and eventually he'll become Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And in 1522, he's going to write his spiritual exercises. So similar to what we saw with Saint Benedict and his rules for a monastery, this is a day-to-day plan of meditation, prayer, and physical exercise. And over the next 18 years, he's going to gather followers to his ideas. And in 1540, the Pope is then going to create a new religious order based on the teachings of Ignatius of Loyola, and these is a new order called the Jesuits. The Jesuits are going to have three major focuses. They're going to go and found schools. Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. is a famous example of a Jesuit school of university. You've got St. Ignatius on the south side of Chicago. You've got Loyola Academy. Those are all Jesuit institutions run by the Jesuits, like how Joliet Catholic is run by the Carmelites and the Franciscans. The idea behind the Jesuits in the 1500s founding schools is to educate people and how they want them to be taught in Catholicism, and then be able to go and start schools so that kids are being brought up in this Catholic education from a young age. They're looking to convert non-Christians to Catholicism. So this is again, not just that you've now got these Protestants who are non-Christian, but remember by 1522, this is 30 years after Columbus has sailed the ocean blue in 1492. So this is 3 years after Cortez has landed in Mexico to take on the Aztecs. So the Europeans are very much seeing their eyes open to all of the non-Christians in the world. So the Jesuits are sending people out into these places to convert them to Catholicism. If you've seen Martin Scorsese's movie Silence with Liam Neeson and Adam Driver, those are two Jesuit priests who go to Japan to try to be able to convert non-Christians to Catholicism in Japan. Then thirdly is to stop the spread of Protestantism. The Jesuits and the Protestants begin to see the world as a zero-sum game. You're either a Protestant and are correct, or you're Catholic and correct, and everybody else then is, quote, wrong, end quote. And so the focus of the Jesuits is to spread their brand of Catholicism to help stop the spread of Protestantism, because the Protestants are also going into Africa, Asia, Australia, North America, South America, Latin America to spread their religion as well. And if they become Protestant, then they're not Catholic. And again, it's that zero-sum game that these guys are being caught up in. That's St. Ignatius there on the left. His, again, spiritual exercises that he goes and writes are written there. And so those are the ideas that he comes up with. To finish up, we have a couple of different popes who step in to continue the reforms of the church, taking the ideas of people like Ignatius to make the Catholic Church a little bit more up to date and responsive to people's criticism of it. So from 1534 to 1549, Pope Paul III took four important steps. One, he created a council of cardinals to investigate abuses in the church, particularly about the sale of indulgences, to be able to say, hey, is the accusations against this true? How are we doing this? What's the role of indulgences in the church here in our lives? He approved of the Jesuit order, as we just saw. He used the Inquisition to seek out heresy in papal territory. So the Inquisition is a church-run investigation unit. So this is going to very much get a different connotation when it's being used in Spain to rout out heretics when all the Muslims and Jews are expelled out of Spain. But this is just a general court and investigative unit for the Pope to be able to go and find out heretics, all right, to go and get rid of. He's also going to call the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent, which is a council of church leaders, is going to be able to go and make several important decrees. So the Council of Trent says that the church interpretation of the Bible is final. What the church says is what the Bible says. So if you read the Bible, good, great for you. But how you interpret what the Bible says can only be said through the Catholic Church. To directly counter Martin Luther, the Council of Trent says that in order to be able to earn salvation, you need faith and good works for salvation, directly countering what Martin Luther is teaching. The Council of Trent says you need the Bible and church tradition are both equally powerful authorities for life guidance. So you can pray to those saints. You can pray to the Pope. You could have the Pope do stuff for you because that church tradition is built upon the base of the Bible, and those are both equal authorities. Thus, the Pope is in power. Finally, the last one is that indulgences are valid expressions of faith. Remember, it's really the issue Luther has is not just the idea of having an indulgence wipe away of, again, you hit your brother, you're not supposed to do that. You call your dad a bad name, you're not supposed to do that. So you can get, say, a small amount of money to get an indulgence to wipe away those small sins. It's that paying large amounts of money to get into heaven for free, uh, to get into heaven with for free in the case of all your sins are being wiped away. That's where Luther has an issue of. And that's again what the church is really saying as well. So the indulgences are valid expressions of faith. However, it's very much along those lines of small payments to get rid of small sins. So Pope Paul III is very vigorous in going out and doing all this. However, he's unable to do that because he goes and dies. And his successor, Pope Paul IV, is then going to step in and vigorously carry out the council's decrees. He's the one that goes and puts all this stuff in action. It's one thing to say this is what we're going to do. Pope Paul IV, again, these guys, you're going to think of them almost working in tandem, goes and makes these declarations actually work in the real world. He, in 1559, is going to create an index of forbidden books to burn them in bonfires to assert the power of the Catholic Church. So that's just a painting of the Council of Trent, where it's going and taking those ideas of how we're going to counter Luther's claims of church abuses and be able to go and kind of fix them. So finally, to finish up for the slides for this unit and to be able to finish up our notes for the Reformation, what are the end effects of the Reformation? What comes out of this movement for reform of the Catholic Church? Obviously, there's going to be religious effects. Despite the wars, despite the persecutions, these Protestant churches are going to flourish, and even further new denominations are going to develop. And we're still seeing new denominations of Christianity develop even into the 21st century. So, despite the best efforts of the Catholic Church, they're unable to stop the growth and splintering of its organization as more and more people become Protestant. However, whoever remains in the Catholic Church is going to be, the church itself is going to become much more unified after the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent very much gives the Catholic Church an understanding of what it is, so they can very much see what the Catholic Church is not. And that gives them a little bit more direction and particularly more guidance when they're being scorned and criticized by these other groups. The social effects of the Reformation include that Protestants and Catholics both emphasize education. So what we're going to see is both these denominations putting in more schools, and it doesn't matter how much you believe in Jesus or in atheism or any other ism, more schools are better for everyone because they're not just teaching you about the Bible, they're also teaching your reading, your writing, your arithmetic. So both Protestants and Catholics emphasize education than religion. And the side effect is that more people are going to be going to schools. You get a better educated society. We can solve more problems. Women's roles aren't going to change very much, even with the changes of religion. But we do see, particularly in the Protestant religions, women being able to have a place outside of the home to be able to espouse their beliefs, and most importantly, being thought of as an equal in those certain spheres. So a woman at some of these different Protestant churches is going to have equal say in theological matters, in church matters, which again gets at the idea that Martin Luther says that all people with faith are equal. Finally, the political effects of the Reformation is that the Catholic Church's moral and political authority has continued to decline. We talked about in 1098 when Pope Urban II has asked for a crusade. 100,000 people stop what they're doing and go follow what the Pope is saying. You're not going to see that anymore. The Catholic Church is very much on its way out. Its authority is being undercut and is declining. And then who's there to pick it up? It's going to be the individual monarchs and the eventual nation states that are going to gain power. And so, out of the lessening of the Catholic Church's political authority in Europe, we're going to see the rise of the nation state come in its wake and create a whole new system of organizing Europe in and around, instead of kingdoms, but of nations. And we'll see how that plays out as we talk about the development of Europe through the rest of the semester.